Welcome to Dawn of the New Earth. My name is Morgue. I'm an ex-Christian revealing hidden knowledge to create a new world. And today we're talking about one of the darkest steps of inner alchemy. And it's extremely important because it can change your life, but most people skip over this part. It has to do with the disintegration or dissolution of the self and facing the darkest aspects of your unconscious, which is, of course, the shadow self. So we're talking about step 2 of inner alchemy, known as dissolution, where we dive into the waters of the unconscious to explore the darkest aspects of ourselves. A very important step, a very critical step, and it's going to be really good. So as always, my friends, make sure that you hit like and subscribe. And if you enjoy my work, become a member right here on YouTube by hitting the join button below this video. It helps out a lot. You get access to all of our members only videos at certain tiers, and all members get access to all of my alchemy downloadable PDFs for free. There's about 6 of them out right now. I'm going to do one for this video, so there'll be 7 and more. There'll be a lot more as well. And it's an excellent resource for understanding and learning alchemy in a very easy and practical and applicable way. And it helps out the channel, so I appreciate it. Also, remember to check out my book, Neogenesis, Dawn of the New Mind, if you are interested in the Neogenian system and the particular system that I promote. Make sure that you check this out. This is book 1 of a 5-part series. Start with book 1, then you can go to book 2 or go all the way to book 5. Why? Because book 5 is where you're going to find all the stuff that we talk about with regard to transformation of the self. This is psychogenesis, self and universal transformation. Here you'll find stuff about the shadow self, the mirror self, the power self, hyper-awareness, will forming, transforming reality, etc. All, of course, in a logical and rational framework without all the woo-woo bullshit. So that's always nice. All right, so we're getting started today, my friends. We are talking about dissolution. Oh, and by the way, because I know a lot of people are asking me about my shirt, this is my shirt. You can take a look. Lilith take the wheel, which is appropriate because Lilith is under the moon, and the moon is one of the cards that we're going to be looking at today, but Lilith is very much associated with the unconscious. Anyway, I didn't mean to wear that shirt to line it up with this, but it lines up pretty nicely. So what are we talking about today? So last week we talked about calcination. Calcination is the first step of inner alchemy. Calcination is associated with fire and lead and Saturn, which means it's about purifying the self by burning down all false beliefs and egoic identification, all false structures, all false beliefs, all limiting thoughts that one might have about oneself, all limiting, systems that have been instilled in us from religion or culture or family, all the aspects that aren't us. It's about burning all that away. That is what calcination is. Oh, and real quick, I want to remind you again, just hold that thought for a minute, what we're even doing here. I always want to emphasize this and remind people this because I think it's easy to forget, like, why are we even talking about all this? Remember, alchemy is not literally true, but it is a symbolic framework and structure for communicating with the unconscious mind and understanding how to go through inner transformation. So we use these symbols and we use this structured system to symbolically transform the psyche and connect with our unconscious mind. So it's essentially a very advanced psychology. All right. So because the unconscious doesn't communicate through words, it communicates through symbolism. So we're going through this symbolic structured system to understand how to transform the self. That is what we are doing here. Okay. So I described a bit about calcination. If you didn't see calcination, check out the previous video in this series. I have them in a playlist. So dissolution is next. And dissolution it goes hand in hand with calcination. And you'll see, so the steps are calcination, then dissolution, then separation. I don't want to get ahead of myself here, but the reason why I'm saying that is because dissolution stands right in between them and is kind of a connecting principle because it has aspects that are similar to calcination, but it also will facilitate what comes next in separation. So calcination is about, like I said, it's about applying fire to burning the, burning away false structures. So in terms of alchemy, dissolution is about dissolving a solid into a liquid. And so it's about using something you're essentially dissolving. First you were on, there's a lot of self-destruction here going on. First you set yourself on fire. Now you are dissolving yourself. But what you're dissolving are the aspects that are limiting. So how is this different from calcination? Well, it is actually quite a lot different from calcination, though there are some similarities. So calcination is driven by fire. And we remember that fire represents transformation and will. So it's more about, like, calcination is more about identifying false structures, realizing, oh, that's not me, and breaking down those identifications. So what happens here during that phase of calcination, something happens which is known as the wounding of the personality. So what is the wounding of the personality? The wounding of the personality is when essentially you are damaging your ego identification. Remember, the ego is not a bad thing, but you don't want to identify with it. So by wounding the personality, what you're doing is you're realizing that's not me. That's not who I am. And so when you go through this process of wounding the personality in the calcination phase by breaking down those identifications, what that causes you to do psychologically is turn away from the ego to the higher self as the guiding principle. So remember, in the Neogenian system, the higher self we call the inner star. And what this means, right? So the ego is the center of your field of consciousness, and it has to do with identification and organizing consciousness. What is the function of the self? The function of the self, the higher self, the inner star, is to promote unity, to create wholeness. That's not what the ego necessarily does. The ego is about categorizing things, identifying things. It's a very, sort of left brain process in a lot of ways. The higher self is everything, which includes your ego, but its main focus, its main function is to create and promote unity and wholeness. So this idea of wounding the ego, wounding the personality in the calcination phase makes one turn away from the ego towards the self. And what that means in more literal terms is that instead of adhering to ego identifications, you are beginning to explore the unconscious to create unity. You see what I mean here? So a lot of people look at their higher self as this like being that's guiding you. And you can think of it that way. But what it really means, it's not like some external being that's guiding your life. What it really does, all of these structures have different functions. Like I said, your ego is the categorizing function, the center of identification. Whereas the self is wholeness and unity, the higher self, the inner star. So connecting to your higher self or inner star means beginning to focus, instead of on ego identification, on creating unity. And so this process of calcination and the wounding of the ego, or the wounding of the personality, is the first glimmer of connecting to the inner star, because now as you transition to this phase of dissolution, you're going to start to access the unconscious mind, which is going to begin your path to creating unity. So do you see, there's like a very important change here that I'm trying to get across. Prior to calcination, you identified with your ego. You thought that the ego was what you were. Calcination occurs, you break that down, realize that's not who you are, thus wounding the personality. And now you are like, well, then who am I? What am I? And you turn to the deep waters of the unconscious, which will ultimately lead to you integrating the unconscious into consciousness and creating unity. So do you see how your function has changed from the ego identification function to the higher self unity function? It's the very first step and first glimmer of that, because calcination made you realize, oh, I am not my ego self. And now dissolution is about diving into the depths, the waters of the unconscious. So let's see. So fire is the element of calcination. Water is the element of dissolution. And a good way to remember these steps is kind of think of a little story. Calcination, you set yourself on fire. It's very painful. You're like, oh my God, I'm on fire. All these parts of me are disintegrating that aren't me. And then so what do? You dive into the water because you're on fire. You want to dive into the water. So you dive into the water. But what happens is you get thrust down into the dark waves. There's a storm. It's stormy weather. You don't know which way is up or which way is down. You're very disoriented. So the dissolution phase is one of the darkest phases because you are entering into the unconscious realm, which is all of your repressed content and which also contains your shadow self. So for those who don't know, what is the shadow? The shadow are all the aspects of you that you have repressed because they have caused problems. So what I mean by that is culture, society, religion, your parents have all impressed upon you or brainwashed you into believing there's a certain way you should be or should behave and other ways that you shouldn't be or should not behave. When you behave well, sometimes you're rewarded. When you behave in a way that is wrong, you are punished. Sometimes these are explicit punishments like, oh, go to your room. But sometimes they're punishments in terms of your friends making fun of you. So let's say you do your makeup in a way that you really like, but is considered eccentric. Your friends might make fun of you. So the shadow self is a psychological defense mechanism where it's a psychological container where repression is a defense mechanism where you take that aspect of yourself that's causing you discomfort or problems because you're being punished or people are making fun of you, and you put it in your shadow. What that means is you repress it. What that means is you deny that it is you. You go, oh, that's not me. And so the shadow self the shadow self is neither good nor bad. That's what's to remember. It's just the container of everything that you repress. You can think of it as like the recycle bin on your computer. But it's like a recycle bin that you can never empty. So if you have a recycle bin on your computer that you can never empty, you can put a lot of stuff in there, but it's not going anywhere. It's staying there. That's like the shadow. Because remember, all of these archetypal symbols represent just functions of the mind. So the shadow self might manifest in a dream, for example, as a demonic figure, but that is a symbol for the trash can of your mind, essentially. That's kind of what the shadow self is. And so it doesn't contain not bad or good necessarily. It's just everything that you've put in there. So it can contain very positive things like creativity, because you might have been made fun of for dressing a certain way or acting a certain way, whatever. It can contain individuality, again, because people often you have to conform. If you act differently, you're weird. Being a strong leader, perhaps, like anything that's too far outside the norm can get repressed in there. But also very difficult things can be in there as well, such as anger problems, because obviously that's not good. And so people repress that, or maybe like sexual fantasies that you have that you consider to be taboo. Like maybe that would be a straight male who is actually has homosexual urges, but doesn't want to admit that. So that gets put in the shadow. So the shadow, it's just important to remember, is neither good nor bad. It's just all the elements that you have put in the recycle bin of your mind that's sitting there. But you've repressed them so much. Usually, one has repressed it so much that you don't even know that it's a part of you. Like that's how good it is, right? So that straight male may have no idea that they have homosexual tendencies or completely deny that they have those urges. And seriously not think like, oh, I could never be like that. Because that's how good they have been at repressing their content. And this often leads to shadow projection, which is extremely negative. And shadow projection is when you project your qualities onto someone or something else and then attack that thing usually. So for example, that, straight male who has repressed their homosexual tendencies may engage in shadow projection and, let's say, hate gay people or even be violent towards gay people or something, right? Because this is psychologically, this eases the psychological tension, because when they see a homosexual, they are unconsciously reminded that they have those urges. Not consciously, they don't realize it, but unconsciously it's there. That causes discomfort. But then if they attack that, oh, you stupid, some slur, right? That eases the psychological tension, because consciously what they're doing is attacking someone. And what this is reinforcing in their mind is, oh, look at how much I hate gay people. I couldn't possibly be gay because look how much I hate them. And you see this, and shadow projection is a huge problem. This is what has caused so much like murder and SA and witch burnings and all kinds of horrible atrocities, because people are just too afraid to confront what's within them. So anyway, my point is that facing the shadow is often difficult and dark, because it contains, it's literally the container of all the things that you don't want to be true about you. And so you've denied them or repressed them. And like I said, you can find very powerful elements like creativity and individuality. And you can find things that are very challenging to deal with, like anger issues, for example. So that's just a very brief description of what the shadow self is. The reason why I'm explaining that is because as you dive into the dark depths of the unconscious here, you are going to begin to face the shadow self. You're basically going to be diving into your unconscious in general, and your shadow self is an aspect of that. So you're going to get the first confrontation of the shadow self in this step of dissolution. Okay? So there's a lot of darkness here. And, there's the wounding of the personality happened during calcination. Now you're turning to the unconscious. You're diving to depths of the unconscious. You're going to, what also can happen in this phase is something known as the dark night of the soul. And the dark night of the soul is basically a dark stage that one can go through, because in calcination, you've started to burn away all the things that aren't you. So what happens? You go, well, who am I? And the dark night of the soul is a very confusing time where you have gotten rid of old thought patterns and behaviors and or ways of thinking, at least ways of understanding reality, ways of understanding yourself. You've gotten rid of them, but you haven't built anything yet. So it can be very confusing. Like, who am I? What is existence? What is reality? And this can lead to depression and isolation, as you feel like perhaps like you can't relate to others, etc., because you're having all these new thoughts that most people don't ever think about. So that can occur in this phase as well. So don't worry, the phases get better. The first two are very hard. Okay, so keep that in mind. They're not all this. This is the darkest phase, right? You've just gone through calcination, and now you are going down into the dark depths of the water and the unconscious. Dark night of the soul occurs here. Confrontation with the shadow occurs here, etc. So let's get a little bit more familiar with the step of dissolution. And so I'm going to introduce the alchemical symbolism for dissolution. And as I do so, I just kind of want you to take note and see how these symbols help you understand the process better. And the reason why I'm pointing that out is because I just explained things in like a very technical way, but now I'm going to explain them in a more symbolic way. And I want you to see how both are important, because usually it's people are one or the other. Like, oh, I just want the pure analytic psychological aspect, or other people are just all about the symbolism, but they both need to work together. Understanding it in an analytic way is important for making sure that you're not getting caught up in crazy ideas and staying grounded in actual real processes. But the symbolic aspect is also important for having a structure to understand all this and organize it, and a symbolic system to communicate with your unconscious, so your unconscious is working with you along with your consciousness. Okay, so like I said, just keep in mind, I want to emphasize this again and again because it's the thing that I find most people totally miss. Why this is even a thing. So see how it helps clarify things. Okay, so let's take a look in the dissolution phase. It's represented by Jupiter. All right, this is the symbol for Jupiter. Remember, before it was Saturn. Now we're working with Jupiter, which is the alchemical symbol that is also associated with the metal of tin. And the dissolution phase is associated with the element of water. Okay? So as usual, remember, this represents the metal that we're working with and the associated energy that we're working with. And then water, the element, is what drives the transformation, is what is driving the process. So before we worked with Saturn, but we've gone through calcination. So we've gone through a transformation. We're no longer Saturn and lead. We're now Jupiter and tin. And so what is it? Remember, Saturn was all about structure and limitations and boundaries. And lead was very dense and heavy. So calcination was all about getting rid of that density, getting rid of that heaviness, getting rid of those limiting, confining ideas. So now we've transformed. We're transforming the different stages of metal. We're eventually going to get to gold, but we've gone from lead to tin, Saturn to Jupiter. And so Jupiter, what is Jupiter? Jupiter is the energy of expansion and exploration. So it's about expanding your mind, which is associated with what we're doing. We're exploring the unconscious. It's about the expansion of consciousness. You can think of Jupiter as sort of like the cosmic adventurer, getting you to step outside your comfort zone and exploring the unfamiliar, exploring the unknown, because you understand that you can only grow by exploring the unknown. And that true wisdom and true knowledge and true understanding lies beyond what is known, the familiar. So you can see Jupiter is the energy that is associated with this, because it's about going out, expanding, and exploring the unknown, which is exactly what we're doing. In calcination, what did we do? We got rid of that which was blocking us. We started to get rid of that was chaining us down. That rigid boundary structure. We've broken that. Now we're at the energy of Jupiter, which is about expansion and exploration and exploring the unknown, which is exactly what we're doing when we are diving into the waters of the unconscious. It's the unknown. That's what the unconscious is. It's unknown to consciousness. So we are the explorer, that Jupiterian explorer, going down to the depths of the unknown to understand what is there. And what is usually down in the depths of the unknown waters? Gold, treasure. We're going to find eventually. We'll find treasure, meaning, transforming into gold. So that is what Jupiter stands for. Now, Jupiter is associated with the metal tin. So remember, before we were working with lead, which is a very heavy, dense metal. Tin, however, is very light. It's soft. It's malleable. So we've transformed from something very dense and heavy and rigid into something a lot more flexible. And this flexibility is symbolizing how we aren't, because remember, the metal is representative of us, of our soul. So we're no longer rigid and dense lead. We are now more flexible tin. We're not at the phase of like mercury when we're literally a liquid, but we're a lot more flexible than lead. And we need to have that flexible mindset to be able to engage in dissolution, which is ultimately, as we'll see, continuing to dissolve rigid thought patterns. So we're kind of still continuing the calcination phase a bit in dissolution, because dissolution is about breaking down, calcination is about burning away. So you're still in the process of getting rid of rigid structures, but most importantly, it's about allowing things to surface. So here's the thing, is that tin is a very thin, or if you take a thin sheet of tin, you can flex it and make a thundering noise. That's how sometimes the thunder had been used, like in old movies to make the sound of thunder. You could get sheets of tin and flex them and would make a thunderous noise. And this is a connecting it to the stormy aspect of the dissolution phase. Because remember, we're in a stormy, watery phase. And then this is also related to Jupiter as well, because Jupiter is the wielder of thunderbolts. So we have both of these associated with thunder in one way, flexibility, exploring the unknown, malleability, and growth and expansion. So are you seeing how this symbolism is helping grasp the concepts better? And not only is it helping you to consciously, hopefully, understand these things better, but you're unbeknownst to you, most likely, it's also communicating with your unconscious. Your unconscious is resonating with this symbolism more than like an analytic structure, because your unconscious is more right brain associated, which is about meaning, not rigid rules. It's about meaning. But let's continue here. So we talked about Jupiter, we talked about tin, and the element is water. So remember, the previous element was fire. Fire represents transformation and will, and it's more about that like willful, energetic process. What's water associated with it? Water is associated with emotions and intuition. What that means is that the driving force of this process, the driving force of step 2 of dissolution, is emotion and intuition. And this is a really great way to understand how these steps are different. This involves emotion and intuition. And let's bring in, you probably can't really tell very well what this is, but it's a little chalice of water to represent the water element that we'll just have sitting here. And so water, all right, is associated with dissolution, and it represents the unconscious and emotions and intuition. That's what water is. Water is associated with the unconscious, emotion, and intuitions, and the fluidity that's needed to continue to wash away those egoic identifications. So there's two things happening here. Remember, the dissolution is kind of a transitional phase. So you are continuing to wash away egoic identification, but you're also going to run into the shadow. And then the step after this is going to be about integrating the shadow. So you see how this kind of sits in the middle? You started to burn things away. This, you're continuing that process, but also encountering the shadow. And then the next step, you'll be integrating the shadow. So it kind of sits in the middle. But what highlights the difference in this phase compared to the last one is the emphasis on the unconscious and emotions and intuition. So before, like I said, it's more about, more like a willful recognition of like, understanding what the ego is, understanding that these things aren't me. This is more of an emotive process, more of an emotional process. And this process can be very hard for those who have, who are very polarized as like a masculine energy. And remember, masculine is another metaphor. Just like gold doesn't mean gold. It's a metaphor for the soul. And tin isn't literally about the metal tin, obviously. Masculine isn't literally about the way we classify gender today in our culture. It has to do with a certain kind of energy. We use it as a metaphor. Okay. So for those who are more in that sort of energy, this can be a particularly hard step because it requires you to engage not with like a logos type of content which is like analytic thinking and structured thought, but this is more about unstructured, emotional, intuitive fluidity. All right. So whereas calcination was more active, dissolution is more receptive. So, like I said, with the element of water, it is more receptive. Fire is considered a masculine element. Water is considered a feminine element. And so during dissolution, you're basically immersing your old self, your old beliefs, and your old patterns that you identified in calcination into the waters of the unconscious. So basically what you broke down by the fire of calcination, you are now beginning to liquefy and becoming a fluid medium that you can then transform. We'll transform later in step 3. But right now, we're using the unconscious to begin to liquefy those old aspects. So basically, what does this mean? What is a concrete understanding of what this actually entails? Well, this means basically allowing stuff to come up. You in calcination, you got rid of a lot of structures. Now, this is a more passive and receptive stage where you're letting what was unconscious begin to come to the surface. Like I said, it's less active and more of a receptive phase, and it's a lot more emotional and a lot more intuitive. And so when we're thinking about it in terms of water, this can manifest as like an emotional release, like maybe old memories might come up, and it could cause you to cry. It could cause, basically you are going down into the like turbulent aspects of the unconscious, where you have like repressed emotions, deep hidden memories, maybe even, traumas. Let me bring this back up. So even remember, the shadow is all your repressed content. So you can repress painful things, but those painful things that you have repressed, like they're in that recycle bin, they're not going anywhere. You can only, because remember, this is all about transformation. So there's a lot of transformation that's going to occur, but you can't transform it until you acknowledge it. If you go like, oh, that's not me, well, then there's nothing for you to transform. You have to realize, you have to acknowledge it. And so any this can be, like I said, repressed memories, repressed painful events that have occurred, losses. And it's about allowing yourself to feel those things, allowing those things to, and this is why I said this is a very dark phase, because it can where you can start engaging with you're engaging with the things that you tried to push out of your mind for a certain reason. And it's about acknowledging that, hey, like your mind did that to try and protect you. It's not like your mind is working against you. It's a defense mechanism. And that's part of it, realizing, hey, don't blame yourself for repressing these things. Acknowledge that repression served a purpose. Especially like, let's say as a kid, you repressed certain things and certain aspects of yourself. Well, guess what? That was probably a good thing to do when you were a kid. So your parents didn't punish you all the time. You kind of had to. It protected you. But now as an adult, you don't need to do that anymore. You can actually start to become your true self. And so in order to become your true self, you have to let those emotions come to the surface. All that pain come to the surface and really immerse yourself in it and feel it. And this is the part of acknowledging it and allowing it to come up. So eventually, in the next phase, we can begin to integrate and begin to transform. Now, I do want to say, like I said, this can be very difficult, a very difficult phase. So this is, I always highly recommend getting a therapist. Therapy is great. And so if you have a therapist, especially you'd want one that's like a Jungian, who's familiar with Jungian theory, Jungian psychology. And a therapist should be very, very good about helping you work through these things, discovering these things. And so the dissolution phase, like I said, is less about like analytically analyzing things, more about allowing things to surface in an intuitive way and allowing yourself to feel those things. Being able to be alone with yourself, your own mind, and your own unconscious. Okay, so it's about like letting all these aspects of you come to the top, come to the surface, and again, like I said, this phase is a lot. It's water. It's very fluid. It's not super defined because it's going to be different for everyone. In the next phase of separation, that's the element of air, which is intellect, and it gets a lot more analytical, where we start to be like, okay, now that we've dissolved the structures, the faulty structures and calcination, now that we've begun to immerse ourselves in the unconscious and we've felt what we need to feel, what are we going to do about it? How, technically speaking, how are we going to integrate it? How are we going to begin this process of transformation so that these energies are helpful to me? And so the dissolution phase is less about analyzing or figuring out what to do about it. It's more about letting it come up and feeling it, and in an emotional and intuitive way. So it's twofold here. Continuing the process of breaking down that began in calcination. You're still, it's a long process. So you're still letting old identifications dissolve away, and you're letting what was repressed, what was being blocked, to come up. And this can result in a lot of different things. Like I said, it can result in difficult things like the dark night of the soul. It can manifest in your dreams. In dreams, you could start having dream imagery, perhaps related to water or oceans or rivers, or the shadow can result in like demonic entities as well, because the shadow often manifests in our dreams as monsters. And because remember, they're all the aspects of ourselves that scare us or that we thought was bad for one reason or another. But really, these monsters aren't trying to hurt you. They want attention. And that's what we're going to find out in the separation phase, is that it's not about denying your shadow. So like Carl Jung, great quote by Carl Jung. You may have heard it before because it's quoted quite a lot, but it's one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And that's what a lot of this is about. It's about making the darkness conscious. And he also said, how can I be substantial if I do not cast a shadow? I must have a dark side also if I am to be whole. And this is really defines these next two, these two steps, the step of dissolution and then separation later, where dissolution is that watery, emotive, intuitive aspect of letting things come up, feeling things, acknowledging things, not so much defining or categorizing or analyzing. It's not that intellectual engagement yet. That will come next. Right now, it's that phase of letting it, immersing yourself in the unconscious, letting it come up, and letting yourself feel those things. And so there's a lot of ways that you can work with this. Let's see. So you can engage in a lot of, actually, you know what? Before we talk about that, I want to mention one more thing I forgot to say, because I assign a tarot card to each of these. And so in terms of tarot, the moon card is a card that is excellent to associate with this particular phase. Okay. A lot of water imagery. And what does the moon represent? The moon represents your fears and illusions. And it can also represent confusion and unconscious fears. So here we have, the moon and the animals and the water. And of course, the water can symbolize the waters of the unconscious. And you have the animals as well as a creature coming out of the water, which can represent, more like instinctual, because in the unconscious, that's where your instincts are as well. So not only are your repressed content, but your sort of like instinctual urges as well, your animalistic, more primal urges that can be frightening, etc. These are all within your unconscious. And we have the light of the moon guiding our path, but it's not, the brilliant light of the sun. It's dimly lighting the path forward. And so we can understand this as being, remember, when we wound the personality, we begin to turn towards the self. So this can be like the very first glimmer of turning towards the inner star. It's there, but we're still in the darkness of the unconscious, dealing with our primal urges, our unconscious waters, and unconsciousness in general. And so, like I said, the moon represents unconscious fears and illusions. And so it's a very good card for representing going down into the unconscious to confront your fears and dissolve the illusions of the ego identifications that you may have. And so that's what that is the card that I associate with this particular step in inner alchemy, being the step of dissolution. Okay, so what are some things that one can do about this? So remember, this is kind of a phase where it's kind of like, it's not an intermission, but I talk about this in my book, Neogenesis. At the end of it says Neogenesis is all about how to destroy false belief systems that you have. And at the end of Neogenesis, I say, before you start creating a new system, take a minute, take a break, allow yourself to kind of be in this stage for a moment. Because what often happens is, like I said, the dark night of the soul, it can be very confusing. And it's that time, that sort of in-between time where you've destroyed certain aspects that you've identified with, but you haven't created anything yet. And so before you create, you kind of want to pause and take a minute, because it's kind of it's like being under the, the being tossed around in the waves. What am I? Who am I? What is existence? What's part of my unconscious? And you'll find that stuff starts to come up as you pay attention. And when it does, you want to feel those things. And so in terms of like practices, it's very much, you can consciously try and discover things that you have repressed and actually feel them and allow yourself to have an emotional release, a cathartic release. So there's a lot of this is about cathartic release. So art is also a great way. Any kind of art you like, music, dance, painting, etc. You can use to express different aspects that are difficult in a cathartic release. Meditations as well. Before we talked about a calcination meditation, you can engage in a dissolution meditation as well. Remember, in alchemical meditation, that there's a difference between regular meditation. Regular meditation is about clearing your mind. Alchemical meditation is about filling your mind with archetypal symbolism. So in the first one, we did fire symbolism. In this meditation, you would want to do symbolism involving water. It could be about, immersing yourself in water, whatever it is you're doing, allow yourself to be in water during that, imagine yourself in water in that meditative phase, and engage in that process of mindfulness and being aware of what you're feeling, not trying to force anything, but allowing things to come up. And you'll find that stuff comes up. You'll find, if you're sitting there and allowing yourself to be open in that archetypal state of being immersed in water, difficult feelings can come up if you're truly being open to it. So it's about practicing being receptive and open. And that's why I said, like those who are very familiar with feminine energy, this might be a lot easier for people who are very polarized in that dynamic. Whereas those who are more polarized in masculine dynamic, it might take more practice. Because, typically it's not, if we're talking about like our culture today, it's not related to the gender today, but, just as a generalized example, men are typically told that they're not allowed to feel their emotions. They have to be tough. They have to be strong. They don't get sad. They don't cry, etc. So that's more of a cultural thing. But if we take that into account, you can kind of get an idea of what I'm saying, where this can be a lot more difficult, whereas feminine polarity might find it easier, might find it more natural. And that's again, remember, it doesn't matter if you identify as male or female or non-binary or gender fluid, doesn't matter. These are just different ways of experiencing existence. We all experience things differently, and we're all going to have strengths and weaknesses. You'll find certain steps come naturally to you and are easier than others, and some are more difficult. And so, like with this particular step, some people right away might be like, oh yeah, that makes total sense. Okay, let me go do that. And I'm going to go in a meditative state, allow things to come up and paint a picture afterwards and do a cathartic release, etc. And so someone else might be like, what do you mean? I'm just sitting here with my eyes closed and I don't feel anything at all. Well, it might take a lot more practice and connecting to your unconscious and engaging in that sort of stuff more and more. And the more you engage with like symbolism like this, the more of a connection you're going to make with your unconscious and your intuitive side and emotive side. The more that you engage with these, that's why I always talk about it's important to do both the analytic thinking and the symbolic, intuitive communication as well. But to be clear, just again to reiterate, this particular step is associated with more with receptivity, being open, emotions, intuition, and the unconscious. You're letting things come up. You're being cathartic by engaging in art or whatever to acknowledge and release it. But you aren't labeling it, categorizing it, analyzing it, judging it, anything like that. That's going to come next, when in the separation phase, when we start to actually then, with the air element, begin to critically examine these things and figure out, what do I do with it now? What do I do with this stuff? So, I want to mention as well, I mentioned a meditation. What you might, find helpful as well is doing a meditation in a bath. You could do it in the bath while you are literally in water. Of course, always do all these things safely, but that's another way that you can connect with that archetype if you feel like it. It's really it's about creating what feels right for you. So if that feels right for you, like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense, I think that would be helpful. If you're someone who's like, no, that's going to be really uncomfortable, then don't do it. There's no real right way to do these things. There are more helpful ways to do things than others, but really it's about ultimately what resonates and connects with you, but actually trying to make that connection and establish that that system. So to go over again, remember, this is the stage of dissolution. The stage of dissolution is represented by Jupiter, which is about expansion and growth and exploring the unknown. It's associated with tin, which is more malleable and flexible, allowing us the flexibility to explore our unconscious, and water, which is about emotions, intuition, and the unconscious, and being receptive, allowing things to come up. And that's with the element of water. And then, of course, the moon is the tarot card assigned to this, which has to do with facing unconscious fears and illusions, and representative of the unconscious and inner primal aspects as well. So that is the process of dissolution. Like I said, it's basically the darkest step. The next step is separation, where we set ourselves on fire. We dived into thunderous storms of the water. Now in separation, we're going to come up for air, and we're going to start working with the air element, where we're going to start actually analyzing these things and finding ways to integrate them, which means to deal with them. But this is a very important step. So, make sure you don't skip it. It's important to actually acknowledge and feel these things and let these things come up. And you're going to find that it helps you develop a relationship and connection with your unconscious mind. So next week, we will be talking about separation. I hope you enjoyed that, my friends. As always, I will be creating a PDF download for this step that's free to download for all members. This will be the 7th one. The 7th have a whole bunch on all the different steps and aspects of alchemy. So become a member. You'll get access to that. Just hit the members tab on my YouTube channel, or you can sign up on Patreon, and it helps out the channel a lot. I really appreciate it. Make sure to check out my book, Neogenesis, Dawn of the New Mind. If you're particularly interested in what we talk about here, Psychogenesis is also goes very well with it, because it talks about inner star actualization, which is essentially what inner alchemy is representing in a symbolic way. Make sure you follow me on Spotify. The link is in the comments or in the description of this video. Helps out a lot. And thank you to everyone who supports. I appreciate you guys very much. A big shout out to Renaissance Fairy, Cassidy, Angela, DB, Nusalina, Dallas, Digital, David, LaDonna, Grace, Kira, Val, and everyone else. Thank you very much.